So good to have you join us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-eun in Seoul. Let's first get started with a look at the day's highlights. The government and the Bank of Korea, along with state-owned banks, get together today to discuss ways to fund the country's aggressive corporate restructuring efforts. We're going to see 6 more duty-free stores here in Korea by 2017, and they are expected to create thousands of jobs while also attracting hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. These stories and more coming right up. But first, the Korean government is working to boost domestic consumption over the upcoming long weekend. During a meeting with retailers, the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy said that from Thursday, it will operate a team that's dedicated to supporting businesses and resolving potential issues they might face during the holiday. Korea will also work to fuel domestic demand through toll gate exemptions and by offering free entry to museums and tourist hotspots. Retailers like department stores and supermarket chains said they are gearing up for big sale events to help revive consumer demand. Korea's foreign exchange reserves rose for the second straight month in April. The Bank of Korea says the reserves swelled to around $372 billion as of the end of last month, up roughly $2.6 billion from March. The central bank attributes the increase to a rise in investment profits and the dollar converted value of the strong Japanese yen and British pound. In April, the yen jumped 4% against the greenback, while the pound strengthened over 1.5%. Korea had the 7th largest foreign reserves in the world as of end March, following China, Japan, and Switzerland, among others. President Park Geun-hye's historic and productive Iran visit is now behind us. And as news of the flurry of signed proposals sink in, Korean companies are bracing for busy days ahead. And our Eunice Kim tells us more about the new business that could come from a post-sanctions Iran.
Iran's 5-year development roadmap aims for an 8% growth rate achieved by 2020. And to get there, there's a lot of work and handshaking ahead. First, the oil-rich country plans to invest $500 billion through 2025 to rebuild its rusty energy sector, an area that Korean builders have had their eyes on. With the MOU signed on Monday, a consortium led by Daewoo E&C and Hyundai E&C are closer to winning a 2-stage $10 billion oil refinery construction project with Iran's Bahman Geno company, as well as a $1.5 billion highway project linking Tehran to Shomal. A string of other builders, Taerim, GS, and Sangyong among them, are working to win over $30 billion in new orders. An MOU on maritime shipping and port development could firm up a $1 billion deal for Daewoo Shipbuilding, a much-needed reprieve from its year-long drought.
Iran has the world's 4th largest oil reserves and 2nd largest gas reserves. It also has a population of 85 million, but a potential of 150 million, including Iranians living in Central Asia.
Hyundai Motor is preparing to re-enter the market as Kia Motors resumes exports of its semi-built parts to a state-run auto company. On Monday, Uri Bank became the first Korean commercial bank to open a branch office in Tehran, as President Park Geun-hye pledged an unprecedented $25 billion financing program for Korean companies working on infrastructure projects in the Islamic Republic. Iran is a country strategically positioned, connecting the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. And it is where Korea hopes will be the start of a second Middle East boom as the two countries seek mutual deliverance from challenging times. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Five out of Korea's top 30 business groups have logged debt ratios exceeding 200% as of last year. According to corporate ratings agency CEO Score, these firms are Hanjin, Kumho, Asiana, Daewoo Engineering and Construction, Hyundai Group, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering. But out of the five, Daewoo Shipbuilding saw its debt ratio spike the most to over 7,300%, ballooning by over 6,800 percentage points in the span of a year. Debts held by the 252 business units under the country's top 30 groups have inched up by 2.5% to $243 billion. And following news on those skyrocketing debt levels, today the Korean government and the central bank sat down together for their first meeting on how to support state-owned banks that will have to make up for losses when overhauling the country's cash-strapped shipping and shipbuilding companies. For more on what was up for discussion and what the debate over the Korean QE program is all about, we're now joined by our Hwang Jae in the studio. So Ji-hye, what did the related ministries and the central bank agree on today?
Well, as you mentioned, it was the first task force meeting that involves the Finance Ministry, the Bank of Korea, the Financial Services Commission, the Financial Supervisory Service, and, of course, state banks, that is Korea Development Bank and Korea Exim Bank. So to get straight to the point, not a lot of details surfaced from the meeting, but the parties did share the view that expanding the capital base of state banks is necessary in order to preempt any possible financial instability that could be triggered in the process of corporate restructuring. And to do so, they pledged to comprehensively consider all policies, meaning that both fiscal and monetary policies are on the table for further discussions.
Now, with that larger framework in mind, what kind of options does the country have to cushion state banks?
There are about three options that are currently being discussed. The first one is injecting state money through an extra budget, and this method is considered most conventional and perhaps less controversial as it goes through a parliamentary approval process. But because it takes a longer time, especially with the country's ruling party recently losing the parliamentary majority and the likelihood of it worsening the country's fiscal soundness, the government is turning its eye toward the central bank. Now, the remaining two measures involve the BOK and its authority to print out more money. The central bank could either directly give out cash to the state banks, that's one, or buy up bonds of state banks. But these options, too, require legal revisions. Now, this whole process of the central bank printing more money to bolster funds for state banks is what's being referred to as Korea's own quantitative easing.
So you talked about Korea's own quantitative easing. Now, at this point, we're wondering, how is Korea's QE different from the quantitative easing that we've seen from the Federal Reserve, the ECB, and the Bank of Japan?
Exactly. QE, as a lot of people are probably now quite familiar with, is a policy introduced by central banks to prop up the economy when the key interest rate is near zero or even below that. But the central bank essentially buys up bonds, buys up financial assets like bonds to release more money into the market. Now, the Korean version of QE that I just mentioned is different from that, as we still have more room to cut the key rate that currently stands at 1.5%, and the money released would be directed towards specific bailout programs to restructure ailing industries. Up until now, the central bank has remained rather reserved about using its authority to print more money, as it's a decision that can affect the overall livelihoods of the Korean public. Bank of Korea Deputy Governor Yoon Myeon-sik made clear late last week that necessary funds for restructuring should fundamentally come from state coffers, and if the central bank has to engage in the process, it will need social consensus. Now, these remarks had been made despite mounting government pressure. So the discussion today at the task force meeting points to the central bank taking a step backwards from that stance and possibly moving to take the front seat.
And since we don't have a lot of details yet, what kind of stuff should we keep our eyes out for?
Well,
then?
The task force said that it will continuously discuss the matter and lay out concrete plans by the first half of this year. That's the government's aim, but it also made clear that state banks should look inward to improve their own fiscal health. And we only have like 2 months left until the first half of this year ends. So we'll have to see what can really be done about that.
All right. Thank you for all that today, Ji-hye.
Thanks for having me.
Korea's duty-free industry, the world's largest, has been enjoying an average 20% growth in revenue over the past 5 years. And it expects to see bigger growth this year. So, to match high demand, the government has decided to add more of these tax-exempt retail outlets. Our Arirang has more.
4 more duty-free stores will be opening in Seoul within the first half of next year, making that 13 in the country's capital. Add 2 more, one in the port city of Busan and the other in Gangwon-do province, where the host city of the 2018 Winter Olympics is located, and that tallies up to a total of 28 tax-exempt retail outlets around the nation. The 6 additional slots were announced by Korea Customs Service as it laid out the 6-month selection process for new operators, set to start around June.
We predict the new duty-free shops will create about $878 million in investment and 5,000 jobs.
The customs agency said this comes as Korea aims to build more shopping facilities to accommodate the rising number of tourists drawn in by Hallyu and to support the government's drive to boost the tourism sector. More than 3.6 million tourists visited Korea in the first 3 months of this year, generating over $2 billion in sales at duty-free stores, up 21% on year. Out of the 4 additional licenses set aside for Seoul, 3 will be given to large companies, with the 4th going to a smaller mid-sized firm. The decision offers a second chance for big players Lotte Duty Free and SK Walker Hill after they failed to renew their licenses last year and faced shutdowns before June. Hyundai Department Store is another strong contender out to nab the 3rd license. While the government is banking on strong tourist demand, particularly from deep-pocketed Chinese shoppers to give the economy a much-needed pickup, critics say it may have overrated market potential. They add it would have been wiser to add more stores after seeing how well the newcomers, who won bids last year, settle in after their grand opening this month. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
Consumers are intensifying their boycott of products made by Oxy Reckitt Benckiser after the company apologized on Monday for selling deadly disinfectants here in Korea. Now, the victims and families rebuffed the apology, reiterating their appeal for the public to hit the company where it hurts. Our Kim Mo-kyun has more on this story.
From April 18th to May 1st, sales of humidifier disinfectants manufactured by Oxy Reckitt Benckiser plunged a whopping 53% compared to the same period last year. Korea's major supermarket chains also reported Tuesday that sales of Oxy's bleaching agents and fabric conditioners also dropped 38% and 7% respectively. Officials from the supermarkets say that despite numerous promotions held on household items last month, sales of Oxy's products continue to slow. Since Oxy's products take up more than half of the supermarket's bleaching and dehumidifying agents, overall sales in the category have been hit. The mass boycott of Oxy Reckitt Benckiser's products is rapidly expanding through social media. In 2011, the British-based company's household humidifier disinfectant was found to contain chemicals linked to hundreds of deaths and serious injuries in Korea. On Monday, the head of Reckitt Benckiser Korea and Japan, Atta Safdar, delivered a formal public apology and offered to pay out more than $4 million in compensation. The victims and their families refused to accept the apology, calling it an attempt to avoid further investigations and end the boycott. Kim Mo-kyun, Business Daily.
The European Union has rolled out a surveillance system to monitor steel imports in a move to protect European producers from below-cost Chinese shipments. Now, under the system, European steel importers are required to apply for a license that allows authorities to track import trends and more quickly react to unfair trade practices that threaten the bloc's steel industry. China, which makes up about half of the world's steel output, has been accused of dumping its excess supply, which more than doubles the annual production level of the EU. The European steel industry has shed some 7,000 jobs since the latter half of last year, with steel prices dipping by more than 40% over the past 2 years. And that wraps it up for today. But we'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place with the latest edition of Business Daily. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and goodbye.